Oh my goodness. The WNBA, the Indiana Fever organization, it's a complete circus and a clown show. Now, look, I don't know. We got to go through what Bree Turner is alleging versus the Indiana Fever organization in response to Sophie Cunningham. And I was staying away from it, but damn it, we can't stay away from it because it's here now. Sophie Cunningham blasted.
The 2026 WNBA All-Star Weekend was supposed to be the single greatest celebration in the history of women's basketball. Tens of millions of dollars poured into Chicago. Corporate sponsors lined up. Television networks cleared their schedules. League executives told everyone who would listen that this was the moment women's sports officially arrived at the top of the mountain. And then everything fell apart. Not slowly, not quietly, but in the most public, humiliating, catastrophic way imaginable. Right now, the Indiana Fever organization is sitting at the center of a sexual harassment scandal that nobody inside the league wanted you to ever find out about. Players were pressured to stay silent. A male staffer was fired and then buried. And the women who were expected to just smile and keep playing, they finally snapped. Caitlyn Clark, the single biggest name in women's basketball, refused to show up. Other elite stars followed. Veterans started speaking publicly about things the front office desperately tried to keep locked behind closed doors. And one fearless enforcer from the Phoenix Mercury essentially walked up to the entire league and told them their time was up. This is not a controversy. This is a structural collapse happening in real time. And by the time this video is done, you are going to understand exactly why the WNBA will never look the same again. But before we get into all of it, drop a comment right now. Do you think the players are right to revolt? Or is this the kind of drama that kills a league that was just starting to grow? Tell me where you stand because this one is going to divide the room. Let's get into it.
Response. We have got to get into this. Oh my goodness. This is nuts. We're going to get into all the tweets, but she started right here. She said, an issue that has caused problems, though. So she's saying transgenders has not caused any problems in women's sports. This is Bree Turner. An issue that has caused problems, though. Last year on my WNBA team, the Indiana Fever, a male staffer was fired for sexual harassment, but we were encouraged to keep quiet about it. That is an issue. Sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and racism are all issues. Bree Turner just put the Indiana Fever organization on blast. I don't know if this issue, look, I'm not a huge fan of Bree Turner. I'm not into all the activism stuff, but I don't think that she would come out and just lie. Like, it would be really weird if she came out and lied about this, saying a male staffer.
Nobody expected it to come from Brianna Turner. She is not the loudest voice in the locker room. She is not the player who chases headlines or manufactures controversy for attention. She is a veteran, a grinder, someone who has built her entire reputation on being reliable, professional, and measured, which is exactly what made her social media post hit like a freight train going full speed into a brick wall. Turner took to social media and, in a few precise, devastating sentences, cracked the Indiana Fever organization wide open. She alleged that last season, a male staff member employed within the organization had been fired for sexual harassment. That alone would have been explosive enough to dominate sports headlines for weeks. But Turner didn't stop there. She went further and revealed what many believe is the most disturbing part of the entire situation. The players were encouraged to keep quiet about it. Let that sink in for a second. A staff member in a professional women's sports organization was fired for sexually harassing the athletes he was supposed to be working alongside. And instead of the organization standing firmly behind those women, launching a transparent investigation, and making it crystal clear that this behavior had absolutely no place in their building, the players were reportedly pressured to stay silent, to protect the brand, to protect the image, to smile and get back on the court like nothing happened. Turner's post was surgical in its precision. She wasn't ranting. She wasn't emotional. She laid it out plainly and let the facts do the damage, and the damage was severe. Within hours, her allegations were spreading across every major sports platform. Journalists, commentators, former players, and fans were all asking the same uncomfortable question: how long had this kind of thing been happening? and how many other situations had been quietly buried before anyone found out. The Indiana Fever organization responded the way organizations almost always respond when they are caught off guard by a public allegation of this magnitude. They released a statement. A carefully worded, thoroughly sanitized, completely hollow statement that acknowledged they take concerns seriously while saying absolutely nothing about the specific incident Turner described. No names, no timeline, no details, no accountability. Just corporate language designed to make the story disappear as quickly as possible. It did not disappear. If anything, the vagueness of that statement poured fuel directly onto an already roaring fire. Because when an organization responds to allegations of harassment and a cover-up with a statement that refuses to address the actual allegations, the silence itself becomes the story. Players, fans, and media personalities across the sports world took notice. The Indiana Fever had an opportunity to get ahead of this, to demonstrate genuine accountability, and they chose instead to hide behind polished PR language. And that decision would cost them far more than they bargained for. Because Brianna Turner wasn't the only one paying attention. There were veterans across the league who had been watching, waiting, and growing, increasingly frustrated with the way the front offices operated. Turner's post didn't just expose one incident at one organization. It ripped back the curtain on a culture that players had been whispering about for years. A culture where the athletes are expected to absorb everything: the physical punishment on the court, the financial inequalities off it, and now apparently the trauma of workplace harassment, and never once make the executives feel uncomfortable about any of it. The locker rooms were done being quiet, and someone far louder than Brianna Turner was already stepping forward.
Joe. Place any fear in you?
100%. I know that it definitely freaks out me and my teammates along with girls on other teams.
Yeah. Ella, and you are suing your high school because they allow biological boys in the locker room with you, and you've incurred harassment.
Whoa. I didn't even know this part. So this young lady right here is suing her high school for letting biological boys into the female locker room? Hold on, this is crazy.
And my teammates along with girls on other teams.
Yeah. Ella, and you are suing your high school because they allow biological boys in the locker room with you, and you've incurred harassment from that?
Yeah, so I stood up at the school board meeting and said that I think this is inappropriate and boys shouldn't be allowed to share bathrooms and similar spaces like that. And I kind of got shut down, so they said that if you want to take a step forward, you have to sue the school. And so that's what we did.
Wow. And
yo, this is crazy. Wait a minute.
Yeah, so I stood up at the school board meeting and said that I think this is inappropriate and boys shouldn't be allowed to share bathrooms and similar spaces like that. And I kind of got shut down, so they said.
Here is something that does not get talked about enough when people discuss the WNBA. The players, for a very long time, have operated inside a system that was fundamentally not built for them. The league was founded in 1996. For the better part of 3 decades, the women who played in it were expected to be grateful just to have a professional league at all. The salaries were a fraction of what their male counterparts earned. The travel conditions were notoriously brutal compared to the NBA. The media coverage was inconsistent at best and dismissive at worst. And the front offices, the executives, the general managers, the ownership groups, operated with a level of unchecked authority that players simply had no real mechanism to challenge. For years, this produced a very specific and very toxic dynamic. Players who spoke out about internal issues, whether it was unfair treatment, unsafe conditions, or organizational dysfunction, quickly learned that there were consequences for making noise. You could lose your roster spot. You could be quietly labeled as a problem in front office conversations. You could find that your name mysteriously stopped coming up when coaching staffs discussed leadership roles and opportunities. So players learned to stay quiet. They vented to each other in locker rooms and on team flights. They shared stories that never made it to the press. They protected each other because the system certainly was not protecting them, and the executives counted on that silence to keep everything running smoothly. What changed? A few things happened at once, and they happened fast. First, the league's recent explosion in popularity, driven almost entirely by the arrival of generational stars like Caitlyn Clark. suddenly gave players a level of leverage they had never previously possessed. When millions of people are tuning in specifically to watch you play, when your jersey is outselling everyone else in the building, when television networks are renegotiating contracts because of your presence, you are no longer an expendable asset that can be quietly moved on from without consequences. You have power. Real, financial, undeniable power. Second, social media completely dismantled the old gatekeeping system that front offices had relied on. In the past, if a player had a problem with the organization, their options were limited. They could go to the press, risk burning bridges, and hope a journalist cared enough to publish the story. Or they could stay quiet and hope things improved. Now, a player can post directly to millions of followers in seconds, bypass every single layer of organizational PR control, and have her words spreading globally before the front office even knows what happened. That is exactly what Brianna Turner did. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the players started realizing collectively that their silence was actively enabling the behavior they were suffering through. Every time a player stayed quiet about harassment, about cover-ups, about toxic organizational cultures, she was making it easier for the next incident to happen. The culture of silence wasn't protecting the players. It was protecting the executives who created the conditions for these situations to occur. Turner's post shattered that silence in a very public, very permanent way. And it sent a signal to every other player in the league: if she can say it, so can we. The dam didn't just crack, it completely gave way. And what came flooding out next would drag the entire league into a crisis nobody inside the front offices was remotely prepared to handle.
But I don't think that she would come out and just lie. Like, it would be really weird if she came out and lied about this, saying a male staffer, for her to make it up. I don't think she would make it up. But this is definitely in response to Sophie Cunningham saying biological men should not be playing in women's sports, point blank, period. Okay. And she came out and threw the Indiana Fever. Sophie Cunningham, who just spoke about this in the Indiana Fever pregame, through the Indiana Fever. Yo, this is crazy. And if the Indiana Fever did tell people to be quiet about and all that, that's foul. That's nasty work. And everybody should be held accountable from the top down. From the top down. They should be held accountable. Okay. Cheryl Reeves said, of course it weighs on me. The attacks on trans people. Everything that they've gone through makes it seem like it's got way more aggressive. It's sort of sickening.
If you have been following the WNBA with any level of attention over the past few seasons, you already know that Sophie Cunningham is not someone who operates by anyone else's rulebook. The Phoenix Mercury veteran has built her entire identity in this league on one simple, uncompromising principle. She says exactly what she thinks. She does exactly what she believes is right, and she does not alter that position based on who is watching or what the reaction might be. On the court, she is physical, aggressive, and completely fearless. Off the court, she is exactly the same way. Cunningham does not read the room and adjust her message to make people comfortable. She reads the room, decides what needs to be said, and says it louder than anyone else in the building. So when Cunningham stepped in front of a camera before an Indiana Fever pregame and spoke her mind about the inclusion of biological males in women's sports, including her concern about protecting young girls in competitive athletics, nobody who knows Sophie Cunningham was particularly surprised. That is who she is. She is the player who, when an issue is sitting in the middle of the room that everyone else is carefully walking around, walks directly up to it and calls it by its name. What nobody could fully anticipate was the scale of the reaction. The sports world exploded. Commentators weighed in from every direction. Social media divided instantly into two loud, opposing camps. And Brianna Turner, who had been sitting with her own frustrations about the Indiana Fever organization for months, made a calculated decision to respond. The result was the explosive post that brought the harassment allegations and the cover-up into the full glare of public attention. But here is where the story gets genuinely complicated and genuinely interesting, because Cunningham's response to all of it was remarkably composed. When pressed by reporters about navigating a climate where anything she says gets immediately weaponized by one side or another, where every statement gets assigned a political label, a moral category, a tribal identity, she said something that cut through all the noise. She said she really does not care. Not in a dismissive way, not in a way that suggested she was unaware of the controversy swirling around her, but in the way of someone who has genuinely done the internal work to reach a place of clarity about who she is and what she stands for. She acknowledged that she will always receive hate for speaking. She acknowledged that she will always receive love for speaking. And she said she refuses to live by either one, because the moment you start chasing the approval, you lose the ability to be honest. That level of self-awareness from a professional athlete, in the middle of what is unquestionably one of the most politically charged environments in modern sports, is genuinely rare. And it made Cunningham significantly harder to dismiss than the critics had hoped. You can disagree with her position. You can debate the nuance of every point she raised, but you cannot credibly accuse her of being someone who speaks without conviction or without thought. She knew exactly what she was saying. She knew exactly what it would cost her, and she said it anyway. That kind of fearlessness, in a league where players have been systematically trained to stay quiet and protect organizational interests, is almost revolutionary. And it inspired other players to start asking themselves a very uncomfortable question: what have we been staying quiet about and why? To understand why this particular moment erupted the way it did, you need to understand that two completely separate but equally volatile conversations collided at the exact same time, and the impact was seismic. On one side, you had Sophie Cunningham publicly and unapologetically expressing her belief that biological males should not compete in women's sports. This is a position that a significant portion of the American public shares, and it is a position that a significant portion of the sports world considers deeply harmful to transgender athletes and the broader LGBTQ+ community. It is one of the most genuinely divisive debates in modern sports, and there is no version of this conversation that does not generate enormous heat. On the other side, you had Brianna Turner, who holds very different views on transgender inclusion. Turner has spoken openly about her education on the transgender community, about her belief in inclusion, and about her commitment to being a supportive ally. She cited her undergraduate coursework at Notre Dame as formative in shaping her perspective, and she has publicly promoted nonprofits that support transgender individuals. When Cunningham made her comments, Turner responded. But here is the part that matters most. Turner's response was not simply a rebuttal of Cunningham's position on transgender athletes. Turner used her response as the vehicle to expose something far more concrete and far more damaging to the Indiana Fever organization specifically. She essentially argued that if people wanted to talk about real problems in women's sports, the sexual harassment scandal and the subsequent cover-up at the Indiana Fever was a far more urgent and documented issue than the theoretical harms of transgender inclusion. It was a rhetorically powerful move. By embedding the harassment allegations inside a broader conversation about women's safety and organizational accountability, Turner ensured that the story could not be easily dismissed as a grudge or a personal attack. She framed it as a systemic issue, a pattern of behavior by the organization that prioritized its own reputation over the safety of the women in its care. The timing, however, created a uniquely combustible situation, because now the story was not cleanly about one thing. It was simultaneously about transgender inclusion in sports, sexual harassment in professional athletics, organizational cover-ups, player silencing, and the broader question of who gets to define what constitutes a real problem for women inside women's sports. Reporters and commentators struggled to cover it as a single unified narrative because it was not one. It was 4 or 5 different stories that had been violently compressed together by the timing of 2 players choosing to speak publicly on the same day. The front office of the Indiana Fever was scrambling. The league office was scrambling. And the players, watching all of this unfold in real time, were realizing that the conversation they had been quietly having in locker rooms for years was now playing out on the biggest possible stage. The question was no longer whether these issues would be addressed. The question was whether the people in charge of addressing them had any idea how to do so, or any genuine desire to. Based on what happened next, the answer was deeply unsatisfying. If Brianna Turner's post was the match that lit the fire, Caitlyn Clark declining her invitation to the 2026 WNBA All-Star Three-Point Contest was the accelerant that turned that fire into an uncontrollable inferno. Clark is not just the most popular player in the WNBA right now. She is, by almost any measurable financial metric, the reason the league's current explosion of revenue and viewership is happening at all. her arrival transformed the business model of women's basketball in America. Television ratings that had been stagnant for years suddenly spiked to levels that surprised everyone in the industry. Arenas that had been half empty were suddenly selling out weeks in advance. Merchandise numbers climbed in ways the league had never previously seen. Sponsorship deals that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago became routine. Clark is, in the most direct and unambiguous financial sense, the engine of the modern WNBA. So when she officially declined her invitation to the three-point contest, one of the marquee events of All-Star Weekend, an event specifically designed to generate massive television numbers and sponsor visibility, the reaction inside the league office was not disappointment. It was sheer, unfiltered panic. Network executives who had structured their broadcast schedules around Clark's participation were suddenly staring at a ratings projection that had collapsed. Sponsors who had built their All-Star Weekend activations around her presence were asking urgent, uncomfortable questions. And the commissioner's office, which had spent months positioning 2026 All-Star Weekend as the definitive proof that the WNBA had arrived as a Tier 1 sports entertainment product, was watching that narrative disintegrate in real time. Now, Clark did not publicly cite the harassment scandal or the broader player revolt as her explicit reason for declining. The official framing was significantly more muted than that, but the timing was not lost on anyone who was paying attention. Clark's decision came at the precise moment when the league's internal dysfunction was most visibly and most publicly on display. And in the world of professional sports, where nothing happens in a vacuum and every major decision carries layers of meaning, the message was received loudly and clearly by everyone in the building. The league's biggest star did not want to be the smiling face of an event that was simultaneously being exposed as the product of an organization that had failed its players in fundamental and documented ways. Whether or not that was Clark's explicit motivation, the effect was identical. Her absence sent a message to every sponsor, every network executive, every investor, and every front office decision-maker in the league. The players are watching, they are paying attention, and they are done performing for an institution that has not earned their loyalty. The league needed that three-point contest to go perfectly. It needed Clark to drain shots from the logo while the cameras rolled and the sponsors smiled, and the narrative of a thriving, unified women's basketball league held together for one more weekend. Instead, it got an empty podium and a league in freefall. And the dominoes were far from done falling. Caitlyn Clark's decision would have been devastating enough on its own, but the refusals kept coming. And with each new name that declined, the story shifted from a single superstar making a statement to something that looked far more like a coordinated, deliberate, and growing player revolt against the league's leadership. Sabrina Ionescu, the defending three-point contest champion, was also absent from the event. Ionescu is one of the most skilled shooters in the history of women's basketball, and her title defense was supposed to be one of the central storylines of All-Star Weekend. Without her, the contest lost not just a star, but an entire narrative thread that the league had been planning to build its broadcast around. Ionescu's absence was quieter than Clark's, but in the context of everything else happening simultaneously, it was equally loud. And then Kayla McBride made sure nobody could pretend the absences were coincidental. The Minnesota Lynx shooter, one of the most respected and accomplished players in the league, did not quietly decline her invitation and leave it at that. She went public, and she was not diplomatic about it. McBride publicly described receiving what she characterized as a disorganized, disrespectful, half-hearted invitation to the contest, one that communicated none of the urgency or appreciation that a player of her caliber and experience might reasonably expect from a league inviting her to one of its premier televised events. Her comments landed like a grenade inside the league office, because McBride was not just complaining about a logistical inconvenience. She was describing a front office culture that treats its elite players as afterthoughts, as assets to be plugged into events at the last minute, and expected to show up and perform without any genuine recognition of who they are or what they bring to the table. The same culture, many noted, that had encouraged players to stay silent about a sexual harassment incident rather than addressing it transparently and accountably. McBride's public statement did something critically important. It connected the dots. It linked the disorganization of the All-Star invitation process to the broader pattern of front office dysfunction that Turner had described. It made it impossible to look at any single element of this story in isolation. The harassment cover-up, the culture of silence, Cunningham's public stand, Clark's boycott, Ionescu's absence, McBride's blast, these were not separate incidents. They were symptoms of the same institutional disease. Players across the league were watching all of this unfold and asking themselves the same question: why are we protecting an institution that clearly does not prioritize protecting us? Why are we generating revenue for executives who treat us like props? Why are we staying quiet about things that deserve to be shouted from the rooftops? The answer, increasingly, was that they were not. The veterans were done. The established stars were done. And even the rookies, who under normal circumstances would be too new and too vulnerable to risk making waves, were paying very close attention to what the veterans were doing and drawing their own conclusions about what kind of league they had entered and what kind of standards they were going to accept. The front offices had spent years assuming that the players' need for league infrastructure, the rosters, the salaries, the professional platform, would always outweigh their frustration with how they were treated inside that infrastructure. That calculation was no longer holding. The players had found a new source of leverage: each other. And the unified voice of an angry, mobilized locker room is one of the few things in professional sports that money alone cannot simply buy into silence. Kathy Engelbert has been the WNBA commissioner since 2019. During her tenure, she has overseen the most dramatic period of growth in the league's history. The television deals improved. The sponsorship money increased significantly. The cultural conversation around women's basketball shifted in ways that even the most optimistic league insiders had not dared to predict 5 years ago. By almost every traditional metric of league administration, the Engelbert era has been a success story. And yet right now, in the middle of what should have been the crowning achievement of her tenure, a sold-out All-Star Weekend in Chicago that was supposed to announce the league's arrival to the absolute top of American sports, she is staring down the most dangerous crisis the league has ever faced. And the most uncomfortable truth of this entire situation is that significant portions of it were entirely preventable. The Indiana Fever's handling of the sexual harassment incident did not have to become a public relations catastrophe. An organization with genuine commitment to player welfare and genuine institutional accountability would have handled the situation in a way that was transparent, decisive, and protective of the affected athletes. Instead, the reported decision to pressure players into silence created the exact conditions for a future explosion. And that explosion arrived precisely at the worst possible moment for the league. The culture of silence that Turner described did not develop overnight. It developed over years, sustained by an institutional environment where player concerns about safety and workplace culture were regularly subordinated to the league's broader image management priorities. Engelbert's office did not create that culture. It predates her tenure significantly. But the responsibility for dismantling it rested with the league's leadership, and the evidence suggests that the dismantling never meaningfully occurred. Now the investors who poured massive amounts of money into the league's growth phase are asking questions that do not have comfortable answers. They invested in a product, a brand, a narrative of empowerment and athletic excellence that was supposed to translate into reliable, growing revenue streams. What they are currently looking at instead is a league whose biggest stars are boycotting marquee events, whose organizational culture is being publicly described as predatory and silencing, and whose front offices are responding to crisis with PR language rather than accountability. Emergency conversations are happening at the highest levels of the league's corporate structure. Sponsors are conducting internal reviews of their commitments. Network executives are re-examining their broadcast partnerships with a scrutiny that would not have existed 3 months ago. And the players, the actual human beings whose labor and talent and sacrifice generate every single dollar that flows through this system, are watching the executives scramble and feeling something that may be the most dangerous emotion of all for an institution that depends on their participation. Satisfaction, because for the first time in a very long time, the players feel like the ones with the power, and they are not in any hurry to give it back. Engelbert faces a choice that is both simple to describe and extraordinarily difficult to execute. She can continue attempting to manage this crisis through communications strategy and carefully worded statements that address nothing specifically and promise nothing concretely. Or she can do something genuinely unprecedented for the WNBA front office. She can treat the players as full partners in the institution, acknowledge the documented failures transparently, implement real structural accountability mechanisms, and rebuild the trust that has been systematically eroded by years of silence and cover-up. One of those paths leads somewhere survivable. The other leads somewhere the league has never been before. And based on the current trajectory, the players have made it extremely clear that they will not wait indefinitely for the leadership to figure out which road it wants to take. Here is where we land on all of this. The 2026 WNBA All-Star Weekend did not just fail to be the triumphant celebration the league's executives designed it to be. It became something far more historically significant. It became the moment the players decided, collectively and publicly, that they were done operating inside a broken system without demanding that it be fixed. Brianna Turner told the truth about something the Indiana Fever desperately wanted buried. Sophie Cunningham refused to back down from her convictions regardless of the cost. Caitlyn Clark, Sabrina Ionescu, and Kayla McBride used their leverage in the most direct and economically impactful way available to them. And together, without any coordinated plan or formal union action, these women dismantled the carefully constructed illusion that the WNBA is a well-run, player-first institution. The league will survive this, but it will not survive it unchanged. Something fundamental has shifted. The players know their power now, and that knowledge does not go away when the cameras turn off. The real question is whether the people running this league are finally ready to listen, or whether they need to lose a lot more before they figure it out. Drop your thoughts below. This conversation is just getting started.